Welcome, dear listeners. Hope you're all skibbity. Welcome to Ground Pass. It's your Tennis Sigma here, and I'm here with the GOAT of US Open Ground Pass, Anastasia. And yeah, we're all a little bit delulu after this Australian Open.
We're definitely delulu. I think I'm definitely going to need a couple of days without going onto Instagram for at least 48 hours.
Probably a good plan, yes. And I probably do need to stay away from the dictionary by the sound of it. We're here. It's our Australian Open wrap-up, people. It's very nice to actually be recording a Grand Slam wrap-up after all of the results, as opposed to, well, what happened last year, where we were recording during the 5-set epic that was Sinner versus Medvedev.
Yes. All the results are in. We've had, for Nick, his dinner. For me, I have a cup of coffee because I have to stay on brand. But yeah, the Australian Open is done. And we're here to do our wrap up. We have all of our champions. So let's just run through them really quickly before we dive in. But the men's singles champion is Jannik Sinner. He did it again. Someone who we're going to talk about a lot on this, the women's singles champion, Madison Keys, for the first time Grand Slam champion.
Not Aryna Sabalenka.
Yes. Men's doubles was Harry Oliveira and Henry Patton. They won, friends of the show. Women's doubles, Katrina Siniakova, the GOAT of women's doubles tennis at the moment. She won with Taylor Townsend, her partner. Those are your champions for the Australian Open. Now let's dive into the tournament and then the matches. Before we give our 2 cents on the Australian Open, we were sent a voice memo by Todd Scowler, who is a journalist, lives in Australia, and he sent us a little voice memo about his experience at the Australian Open, what his general thoughts are, and we will put it in here, and we'll be right back with our thoughts.
Good evening, Anastasia and Nick, or it's probably good morning where you are. I'm obviously in Melbourne at the moment, and I was hoping to be on my way into the men's final tonight, but unfortunately I didn't get a ticket. So I don't know if you're aware how it works, but so I've got a media pass for the Australian Open, but there's obviously more media than there are media seats allocated. So for the finals and semi-finals and some quarterfinals, you have to kind of go into a ballot. And unfortunately I missed out. I could go in there and wait around for my name to be called when people leave, but that's most likely to be second, third or fourth set. So I think I'd rather just stay home and watch the whole match in comfort on the couch. But in regards to this year's Australian Open, I think for me the match of the tournament has to be the women's semi-final between Iga and Madison. I was lucky enough to be there, and that was one of the best matches I've seen. The clean hitting, the momentum swings, the atmosphere, it was brilliant. It was everything tennis should be, and everything women's tennis should be. As far as the whole tournament goes, I don't think it's been a classic. There hasn't been a lot of classic matches that really jump out apart from that one. The Alcaraz-Djokovic one was pretty good, but apart from that, there wasn't as many, I guess, epics, I guess you could say. Yeah, a good tournament, but not a classic. I don't know, as far as things like the crowd behaviour, you might have read things about it with Djokovic and Danielle Collins and some broadcasters and things like that here. I don't think it's been as bad as some of the media say. I think the Danielle Collins one was Aussies supporting their own in Destiny Ayava. Danielle Collins, as we know, is quite feisty at the best of times, and look, there might have been some people that went too far in supporting Destiny throughout the match, but you're going to get that anywhere. You get it at the French Open, you get it at the US Open, Wimbledon not so much obviously, but you get it all around the world. And I think the way Danielle reacted at the end of that match probably set the crowd off even more. So, okay, you had that incident, then you had the Djokovic incident, which I think was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction in a very small minority of the crowd, to probably the fact that they paid $500 to $1,000 or more for a ticket and it was over in an hour. So that was probably a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, albeit inappropriate. And I think if Djokovic, for instance, had retired after 2, 3 or 4 sets, there wouldn't have been that level of booing. And of course, there shouldn't have been any booing at all because he's an absolute star. But apart from that, I think the crowd behaviour's been totally fine. It's it's not as bad as what it might make out. As far as the Aussie Open goes, I've had quite a love affair with the Aussie Open for a long time now. I grew up going there as a spectator, as a kid. But since then, like in the last 20 years, I've seen it from a bunch of different angles. I've seen it as I've worked there for a sponsor. I've been there as a spectator. I've been there as a coach. I've been there as a player's guest. And the last couple of years, I've been lucky enough to be there as a journalist and covering it through media. So I've seen it through a bunch of different eyes, which is amazing, and I'm very privileged. And it is, I think it's the best Grand Slam of the lot. Of course, I'm probably biased, living in Melbourne. But I have been to all the other Grand Slams, and I just think the location of the Australian Open is, it's a 5-minute walk from the centre of the city. You don't even need to get on public transport. You don't need to drive. If you're staying in the city, you can just wander down and then wander back to your hotel if you're coming here to stay. The location is just brilliant. The grounds they're big. There's lots of seating. There's lots of shade. There's a great atmosphere. There's lots of restaurants, bars, lots of big screens. It is a real, family friendly. It's a real spectator friendly event. This year, however, I've noticed that it probably has got too crowded. It's probably reached a tipping point, especially in that first week where there are just too many people, and you used to be able to wander around to all the courts quite easily. For instance, if there was a match on one of the outside courts, it was about to head into the 5th set, you could kind of get out of your seat, go and see the end of that match, and then go back to another court or the previous court you're on. But these days, I feel like once you leave your seat, you can't really get back on a court. So you almost have to pick a court and stay there, which is kind of like how Wimbledon has been for a long time. I know the first time I went to Wimbledon, I found it quite jarring in a way to not be able to wander around and get a seat on all the courts, because that's how it was here. But I think now it's become so popular here at the Aussie Open that, it's probably reached a tipping point as far as crowd numbers. But opening week here is amazing. So if you want to come and see good players, good tennis, see the players up close, then opening week, qualifying week is the best week. $15. You can see all the best players practice. You can see practice matches. You can see qualifying, which is amazing, as you guys know. Yeah, so overall, look, I just think the Aussie Open is well worth doing if you're a tennis fan, which you guys obviously are. So hopefully we see you down here one day.
And we're back. Todd, thank you so much for sending us that awesome voice memo. I think, Nick, over the Australian Open, because I've done a bunch of bonus episodes, I've got to talk to a lot of people who were actually at the Australian Open in Melbourne. So for the first time, I think I have a very good view of what this tournament is like. And I think I was talking to Will Buchek when I said, Melbourne is now the highest on my list of tournaments outside of the US that I need to go to.
It's probably the most similar to the US from the sounds of it. I mean, like from hearing about what US Open is like, what Indian Wells is like, what Miami is like, Cincinnati, the Australian Open sounds the closest to those kind of experiences, particularly the US Open. So I'm not surprised, and I do get the sense, from listening to them that, this is, and what we discussed sort of on the last couple of podcasts, where it does seem to be the kind of event that is very spectator friendly. Certainly, I think that if you just listen to that, if anyone is going to Australia to go watch and doesn't live in Australia, or heck, even if you don't live in Melbourne, because Australia's a big place, you're going to be traveling around town, and like even the big cities like Sydney and Adelaide are like miles and miles and miles away. I think it's helpful information to kind of start planning now. I mean, you might not be able to buy tickets yet for 2026, but you could certainly get yourself some accommodation booked and look at when you want to go. Flights are going to be crazy expensive if you're flying there. So I think this is one of those things that when we do this show, often we're kind of giving you updates if you kind of are planning on going, you want to get the information. But like if you want to plan a trip, the sooner you start, the better, but especially when you're going somewhere as far away as Australia. And I think listen to that, make some plans, make some notes, come back. And yeah, I think I'm not surprised Australia is very high on your list to go. It certainly sounds like a great tournament to attend. I just don't fancy facing 2 days on the plane just yet.
Nick, we're going to have to get you out of the house. That is for sure. No, I think the one thing I would say that's very different that I've heard so far about this tournament that people keep talking about is how integrated the grounds are to the city center. So, I think Todd talked about it a lot. Also, Craig talked about it, how you can literally just leave your apartment in the middle of the city, walk down the street, and you're at the tennis, which for the US Open is not that at all. I think a lot of people think of New York as Manhattan, which is the middle of the city. The US Open is in Flushing and Queens, which if you're traveling by, the subway to Flushing Meadows, that's like an hour on the train. If you're driving, forget about it. The traffic is insane. I think it's the same thing with Indian Wells. Indian Wells is in more of a suburban, rural area. So it's not like you can just sort of hop, skip, and jump and you're there. You have to drive there. It's parking. I think the Australian Open is truly an urban grand slam where you're in the middle of the city. It's integrated with all the amenities that a city has. People can take the free tram, in and out of the grounds. I think that's really awesome. As someone who loves urban cities, I think it's a different experience to be able to sort of just roll out of bed, put on your clothes, and like jog down to the tennis. I definitely love that aspect of it. And I was watching a YouTube video actually that I will link below of, he's a tennis coach in the UK and he kind of is a tennis content creator. He's called the Tennis Mentor. I'll put his information below. And he was in Melbourne and he made a whole trip out of it because just like you, for example, it was a commitment for him to be able to like go all the way to Australia. So it didn't make sense for him to just go only for the tennis. So he went with his wife and they made an entire trip of it. They went to Sydney first and they actually drove to Melbourne. So they made it a little bit of a road trip, driving to Melbourne and then going to the tournament. I think it's definitely something, if I was to do it, I definitely wouldn't only go for the tennis. I would make it into an entire trip and actually stay there for a while for it to be a bit worthwhile than just 2 weeks of a Grand Slam.
Yeah. You've got to do something like that and kind of do that. I mean, to be fair, I would do that for any tournament, including the USA. But I mean, I'm surprised. I always pictured you just rolling out of bed and strolling down to the tennis, to be honest, because of the way that you kind of describe it. But of course, you do live in completely different areas of New York. And what you're describing like is similar at Wimbledon, right? It's a suburb. It's at the end of a subway line, pretty much. So, like getting there, you're gonna have to change a lot and whatnot. So, yeah, I reckon, go there, get the experience, and learn from this guy, the tennis mentor. On that, I think he had the right idea with planning that trip.
Yeah. And also with the prices, like I've heard from people of different nationalities. For example, the tennis mentor, he is British, Craig and Will, they're American. It seems like Melbourne and the Australian Open seems to be the most reasonable price-wise of all of the Grand Slams. Like everyone was talking about how just reasonable everything is. And I know the exchange rate has something to do with it as well, but pricing wise, I think a ground pass was super accessible. The tennis mentor was mentioning in his video, for example, that he was able to purchase ground passes on the day for, no markup, nothing, just the regular price. And which is great for someone who has to deal with resale tickets for most tournaments. It's nice that even for a massive Grand Slam like the Australian Open, you can just on the day decide you want to go in and get a ground pass and spend the day on the grounds. So it's really nice to see that the prices there are reasonable. It seems like the stadium sizes are not crazy. On ground passes, obviously you're going to smaller courts and stuff. But if you're making an entire trip to go to Australia, chances are you're going to get Rod Laver tickets or tickets to Margaret Court Arena. And it seems like those arenas are not as big as something like Arthur Ashe, which I feel Arthur Ashe is so big. It is so big. I cannot explain to you. If you're in the nosebleeds, you literally might as well just watch it on TV because that's what it looks like. And to know that even these bigger courts like Rod Laver, even though you're in the second section or you're high above, it still has an intimate feel. Yeah, Australian Open is really up there now. I think above the French, maybe not above Wimbledon, because I think Wimbledon is just an experience and it's the history of our sport. So that will always be top of list. But going to Melbourne or Australia and going to the Australian Open is high up there on the list. So that's the venue. You know, I really hope that all the information we've helped provide for you guys is helpful if you're planning a trip. If you're planning a trip, let us know. Let us know who's going, who's listening and planning a trip to Melbourne 2026. Drop us a note, leave us a comment, and it'll be nice to see.
About this because
yeah.
Especially since, you know, I want to know if what we're telling you is right, because neither of us have been.
Yeah, so please let us know. Okay, let's get into the tennis, because that's what we love to do. Let's get into the tennis and the tournament. So, Nick, what were your thoughts in general about this Australian Open as a whole?
It was good fun. Right, this is the kind of, there was usually something that happened, mainly in the women's side, that I felt like, you know, that I could catch up on overnight. Like, there was usually an overnight match that I was checking the match length of to see if it was worth watching, and cracking on with that. There was usually, like, I was watching a match before work almost every day. And then during sort of the earlier rounds, and that was a lot of fun. Like, it got definitely quite crowded during kind of fourth round, where there were a lot of interesting clashes, and quarterfinals as well. As kind of things came into land, I think it was definitely ramped up in a way I wasn't expecting on the women's side. But there's definitely been some memorable moments, and as Australia often gives crazy night matches to kind of tell stories about, I feel like those happen more often in Australia than in the US. But maybe it's because I'm not awake for the ones in the US.
Yeah.
Or the US ones are generally kind of winding down by the time I go to sleep or whatever. But I'm certainly not as aware of, like, the same kind of epics that happen that I can watch around lunchtime in the UK.
Yeah. I just think for the last few years, night matches in the US, they haven't actually lived up. You know, the year Carlos Alcaraz won the US Open, I feel like that's when night matches peaked, because he was just doing all of them, and they were like 5 hours long, and they're going to the morning, and they're all five setters. You know, I think that's when night matches really peaked in the US, and it hasn't really gotten back to those heights. But you're right, you know, in general, for me, this tournament, the night matches were really great. Let us never forget Lerner Tien and Daniil Medvedev 5-setter. That was just an epic of a 5-set match. But for me as well, I think in general, this tournament, the storylines and the fun in general has been on the women's side. I think the men's side of the draw had it in the earlier rounds, but by the second week, it kind of sort of died down, and the writing, for me at least, was on the wall of who was going to go win this. But the women's side...
I actually think we can blame Novak Djokovic for that. Because...
Yes, which we can talk about a little bit later on. But for me, the women's side, week 1 and week 2 was just a constant... what's gonna happen. It was so exciting, and just like, because there were just so many twists and turns. You thought one thing was gonna happen and the other thing happened. So for me in general, I think the women's side definitely delivered the matches.
I don't know if we got that until like the quarterfinals, really. Like, I think up until the quarterfinals, we kind of, like, the mid pack were kind of keeping us entertained whilst the top seeds cruised through. And then weird things started to happen towards the end of that kind of started making us question, is this going to go the way we think it's going to go? And it didn't.
Yeah, no, it did not. So, I mean, let's get into the nitty gritty of it. And we can start on the men's side, because I think we will run through that much quicker. But you're right. You mentioned Novak Djokovic. He was mostly the reason, I think, why in the second week, things kind of like ground to a halt. Maybe that's too harsh. Maybe it's too harsh to say it ground to a halt, but I think after that quarterfinal match that he had with Alcaraz, that Alcaraz lost, it just kind of seemed, okay, well, I guess Sinner's going to win. At least for me, I immediately thought that. And I find excitement from not knowing what's going to happen and, things kind of being on a knife's edge. And the air was kind of taken out for me from the men's tournament the moment that happened.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I had confidence that Novak Djokovic was going to make this tournament interesting if he was fully fit. Like, I predicted pre-tournament, I know we don't do predictions, but like I do on other channels, that Djokovic was going to play Sinner in the final. Like, I called that upset pre-tournament. The thing was, Djokovic got hurt, and that was the problem, because that denied us a potentially very, very long, very engaging battle with Zverev in the semis. And then obviously that meant that in the final it was kind of this sort of sense of inevitability, because no offense to Zverev, but he's not Djokovic or Alcaraz. Like, he might be able to be a bit of a thorn in Sinner's side, but Sinner's going to be very, very different. So for me, it was the injury that Djokovic suffered that was kind of killed it for me, rather than necessarily him beating Alcaraz. I believe that he could. I was looking forward to this generational showdown between the guy who used to dominate and the guy who's dominating now, particularly in Australia, because Djokovic obviously made Australia's backyard. Sinner seems to be doing the same thing, and I was looking forward to that prospect. And Djokovic not being able to do it, that was the moment it kind of got taken out of myself. But the possibility, the excitement in my head was there. If it was like, maybe he could do it, I think he could make this interesting.
Yeah,
and I have faith that could happen later in the year at other tournaments as well. I know we're kind of talking about sort of maybe the tennis kind of fell flat a little bit. I didn't watch the match, but I did listen to it. I heard Shelton Sonego was fairly entertaining. I think that was probably one of the highlights of the second week, along with the Djokovic-Alcaraz match.
Yes, no, that one was really entertaining. Again, I just feel like week one of nothing really hit match-wise the way week one hit. And I think I said this last year. It might have been part of our end-of-year review, or I think after the US Open. But for a while now, I at least have had a very strong view that the new kids are coming. I think if you've listened to this podcast long enough, I'm very high on the next gen. I think it's their time now. And if they can take the opportunities, I think they can sort of move forward in the sport. So for a long time now, it was the same last year. It's the same for me this year. I just don't think Novak is going to go all the way. I was not surprised. I was surprised he beat Alcaraz. I wasn't surprised at all that he was out of the tournament. So for me, mostly now, what I'm looking for at tournaments is seeing how these young guns do. So a final for me is definitely Sinner Alcaraz, because that's the next generation. That's what's exciting now. And I think if you're new to the sport and you didn't grow up with, the big three, I think that's who you're looking for. You're like, who's the next one? Because in my opinion, Novak is closer to the end of his career than the beginning, obviously, or he would play till he was 80, which who knows? But yeah, so I'm always interested in that. I mean, I'm also super interested in this new coaching era, which we can mention, but I think the Australian Open so far is the only tournament. I don't know if other tournaments do this, but now they have a coaching award that they give to all the coaches of the champions. They're all in on the coaches in Australia.
Funny, someone replied to me on Blue Sky about this, because the Black Spin Global podcast tweeted it and said, this is a great idea. So they were with us on thinking it was an amazing idea. And I said, seconded, this is brilliant. I love it. And someone came back to me and said, no, the US Open do this. The difference is that they don't do it on court. They do it behind the scenes. So
interesting.
I found a photo of Emma Raducanu's coach when she won it, getting a mini trophy with her. Someone mentioned Sloane Stevens' coach got something.
Wow.
So the US Open do it. They just don't publicize it.
Wow. I wonder if all these tournaments have been doing this, and now finally the Australian Open is just pushing it forward.
It's highly unlikely Wimbledon do it, because they probably find the idea of coaching somewhat unsavory still.
Yeah. Because it's still like super traditional. Interesting. That is fascinating. But yeah, I mean, they're all, from putting the coach's box to, and I saw someone tweet this actually also about the effects of having that coach's box on court, especially in the match between Madison and Aryna Sabalenka. And again, I just feel like I get it. I understand where people are coming from in the sort of the traditional way of it's a player with their mentality and their strength on court, and they have to fight or lose, whatever on their own. I just feel like that is such a it's nice and it's cool, and it's it kind of gives this sort of superhero thing, but I think it's a bit naive to think that these people don't have teams and coaches, and coaching has been so if you're new to the sport, I think coaching has been happening. There've been a few moments where it's been controversial, where someone is, I think Tsitsipas was one of the big ones, where he was, people were saying his dad was like giving him signals and coaching. Everyone's been doing it. I think the tours just finally recognized it and just, made it legal. And I think if it's gonna be here, if coaching is gonna be allowed, let's go all in and let's put it on court. Let's mic them up. I want to hear what they're saying, which I know will be difficult, because I think Novak was talking about that, how he's all for the coaching and having your coaches be close to you. But in terms of like micing it up, that might become difficult in terms of like sort of not letting your opponent hear your strategy and things like that, which I understand all of that. But I love to hear all that nitty gritty stuff. And because I feel it teaches me more about the sport.
I'm going to be controversial here. I agree that banning coaching is pointless in the modern era of tennis. Like, people have had professional coaches since the 70s. Like, the genie's out of the bottle. I think people kind of overestimate the impact of coaching, because most of the time the coaches are saying, come on,
you got it.
You got it. And a lot of players actually don't want to be told what to do most of the time. And then,
a lot of players, take Coco Gauff, for example, she did not have her team on court. Like, that's a choice that some players make. It's not for everyone.
No, they're not. And like, I think, sometimes they will want like a tactical talk. Most of it's going to be reinforcing the tactics they made pre-match anyway, because they think that that's still the best way forward. Unless someone dramatically changes how they're playing, you're not going to do that. So I do think the whole coaching thing is overblown, whether you the people who really don't like it and the people who like it a lot. I do think the impact is minimal. To be honest.
No, I actually kind of agree. I totally agree with you there, because I think a lot of times the people who are against it are more, they think it does more than it's actually going to do. Like, literally, I don't think coaches are there at the moment developing the strategy on the court. Hopefully you had a pre-planning day and a practice session and all of that. I don't think they're out there being like, oh, this is now the strategy, But yeah, so I like new things like that. I think it also, it helps, I think, in sort of the teaching process for people who are new to the sport or don't really know what's going on. I was talking to Will Buchek, and I will leave the link to that episode below, but it's something that I think would help in doubles a lot. Because, for example, he was talking about in commentary, at least some of the commentary he was listening to, the commentators were calling the signals wrong, or were, didn't understand the formations that the doubles players were making. And I thought, oh, that sucks, because if you're new and you're watching that, now you're learning something that's wrong. So it would be nice to hear directly from coaches or people who at least know what's going on
you don't have to be a commentator to not understand the signals. Did you not see the video from before the Australian Open came out? It was that mixed doubles exhibition. Djokovic and Zhang Qinwen took on Azarenka and Murray, and
that was awesome.
Zhang Qinwen did not understand the hand signals that Djokovic was giving her, and it was like, could you just tell me out loud what you're going to do? It's like, no, because they're going to know what we're doing.
And I think they definitely played that up a little bit more, but I would not be surprised if Zhang Qinwen was just like, what? What is that signal? What's happening? But yeah, no, I like all these new things that are coming in. We kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there, but hey, welcome to Ground Pass. That's what we do. But so that was the men's tournament for sure. I don't think that's where the meat of the excitement was at this tournament. For sure, the next gen delivered in the first week. Watching João Fonseca, Lerner Tien, Jakub Mensik, Alex Mickelson, that first week on the men's side was, for me, some of the so exciting, because all I kept thinking was like, if this is the first Grand Slam, first big tournament of the season, what are these kids going to do throughout the year? Really excited to see where they go. But on the women's side, oh, yes, go ahead.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do you still count Ben Shelton as next gen?
No, this is a good question, Nick. Very good question. I do not count Ben Shelton as next gen anymore. He is now on his third year on tour, I think. And he actually is just much older than they are. I think Ben Shelton's older than Carlos Alcaraz.
Yeah, he's 22.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I actually weirdly don't count him as next gen. It's sort of the teenagers and the people who are maybe in their first or just starting their second year on tour. Oh my goodness, how could I not even remember Nishesh Basavareddy, who had his first match and it was against Novak Djokovic, So really excited for these new guys coming through. Yeah. The women's side, that's where that's that second week on the women's side. That's where all the drama.
And the Americans kept us entertained because, okay, I was saying, like, Emma Navarro kept getting into 3-set epics throughout her first 4 matches. And she was the one, like, you would tune into an Emma Navarro match because you knew there was something going to be going down there.
Yeah.
She played Peyton Stearns in that first round, which was like everyone was going mental about that first match they played. She played a really fascinating match with Ons Jabeur in round 3, and then a match against Daria Kasatkina in round 4 that, like, so many people were like, that's the best match of the tournament so far. Little did they know what was going to come.
Yeah.
And Emma was the one who was box office. And then Madison Keys decided to do what she did. She starts going on a 3-set run against Rybakina and then Svitolina, and
isn't it funny too how they split the weeks? Like, I feel like first week was Emma Navarro. No one even was talking about Madison Keys, and then the second week was like Madison Keys week, and which took her all the way through.
It's gone. Yeah, it was like Madison Keys was something like getting a lot of traction, a lot of talking about, and there was always the possibility that she was going to beat Iga Swiatek in the semi-finals because she's got the kind of power games that Iga sometimes doesn't like, although Iga is dealing with a lot better now. But it was just so much more dramatic than we could possibly have hoped. And I was surely she's not going to have enough gas for the final because Madison Keys won Adelaide. She won the tournament the week before the Australian Open started. This woman has played for 3 weeks straight. She got to the quarterfinals in Auckland. She's played a heck of a lot of tennis. The fact that she was playing this well is insane. And yeah, it's almost like the opposite of the next gen of like coming through in the men's side because someone who's already here decided to finally come through. And there's a lot of cool stories around behind that. But yeah, there was I have not seen such an overwhelmingly positive reaction to someone winning their first slam in a very, very long time. Winning any Grand Slam.
Mm-hmm.
Such a long time, and yeah, everyone was like, oh, this is great news. I think the only people who were disappointed was Team Sabalenka, but
even they were having a fun time. I love Team Sabalenka. I think I really loved her reaction to the loss because obviously, everyone would talk about the racket smash, but I always wonder, I'm like, guys, she didn't want to lose. She wanted to win. So your first gut reaction is obviously anger and sadness. So she had that mini racket smash moment. She went off court. She came back and she was so professional. She was so, understanding of the moment, of Madison's moment, and, talked so well about her in that speech. And then, in the sort of backstage, because, you know, it's Team Sabalenka. They're always on social media. They're always posting photos and things like that. And it just seemed like such a measured response because, hey, Aryna Sabalenka is still the number one player. She retained that ranking during this tournament. So I think she has a lot of good stuff to take out of the Australian Open. I think because she also did not play her best, I believe, in this tournament and still got to the finals. I don't know. It was just after that final, I was just so happy. Everyone was happy. Everyone was on a high.
It was the best I felt after a Grand Slam final in a very long time.
Yeah.
I say very long time. 2 years. Let's be real. Because, like, there have been some Grand Slam finals that have been, like, winners have felt inevitable, or I've been pleased for whoever won, but it wasn't a thrill ride in the same way. And I guess it's like there's a lot of context riding on this, and Madison Keys just seems like one of the nicest people ever.
Yeah.
For her to get it, that was coming across the entire time. And she was such a genuine person of, like, that encore interview she did after the Swiatek match where she was like, guys, I'm in the final. This is great. This is so cool.
It was like, so real. Like, it was just a real moment. Reaction.
Well, it's interesting actually because I ended up having very different, it was kind of emotional whiplash from like day to day because after the semi-final, I won't lie, I was a little bit annoyed with Madison Keys.
Why?
Because she denied us Swiatek versus Sabalenka in a Grand Slam final, which I've wanted for a very long time.
Right.
And it was a good match. And then I just didn't care about that after the final because it was like, oh, she won it. She went up there, she played amazing tennis and she won it. And she played amazing tennis in that semi-final. So I guess who cares?
I think it was Mary Carrillo who came up with the term big babe tennis. Mary Carrillo she works for ESPN and she's like a commentator and came up with the term big babe tennis. And I like some big babe tennis. Just crushing the ball. And Aryna Sabalenka and Madison Keys, that was my dream final. That was the final that was only a figment of my imagination because I didn't think it could happen, especially when Iga just started playing so well. So when I got it, I was super excited. Also because I was on court. I was actually in Ash when Madison Keys lost to Aryna Sabalenka at the US Open in 23. And that was a very devastating match for Madison Keys. So to see her turn that around a couple of years later was so fun and satisfying. And just to see the respect between the players. And I don't know, I was on a high. Everyone was on a high. If you watched Coffee Catch Up from that day, I did it with Felicia, who is our number one listener on this podcast. She's the very first listener ever. And you could just see us. We were just so happy with the results of the day. But yeah, so that was your Australian Open. Those were the matches that really brought us joy and on the men and women's side and what we loved, you know. Let's see what next year brings. I'm just excited for the rest of this season. I think this was a really good jumping off point to kind of see where it goes for the rest of the season. So what is coming up? First of all, before we jump into what's coming up on Ground Pass, what's coming up, Nick, on tour next week?
Yeah, so on tour, do you want just next week or the next 2 weeks?
The next 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay. So on the WTA side, I'll do that first because I know that off the top of my head first. So we've got a 500 happening in Linz in Austria. Karolina Muchova is the top seed. And then there's a few other sort of decent players in there, like I think Svitolina's playing, Samova, Clara Towson. And then we also have a 250 happening in Singapore where Anastasia is the top seed and Emma Raducanu is the 7th seed. And so all British eyes will be on that one. And then the week after that will be a 250 in Romania, the Transylvania Open, and a 500 in Abu Dhabi, where quite a few top players have signed up for. And then on the men's side, you've got the Davis Cup is happening this week. Lots of exciting, interesting matches up there. GB are playing Japan. They're away in Japan. The US are away in Chinese Taipei. Yeah, both our teams are in Asia still, Anastasia.
Yeah.
A few others interesting matches in there. But yeah, that's the first round of qualifiers to get to the next stage of the new revamped format of the Davis Cup. At the same time, there's a 250 happening in Montpellier in France because we're starting the indoor season. And then first week of February, we have two ATP 500s happening. We have the ATP 500 in Rotterdam, where I think they've got Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz. I could be wrong.
No, they do. They have them both.
They have them both. So that's going to be fun to watch on TV.
Yeah.
They also have the Dallas Open, which is now a 500. And it's that
Yes.
week.
And that's where all the Americans are going to be. Taylor Fritz, Ben Shelton, Tommy Paul, Francis Tiafoe. It's like literally all the top Americans are going to be in Dallas that first week of February. So definitely something to look forward to.
And Casper Ruud.
Casper Ruud?
Casper Ruud is the second seed. Casper
You
Ruud
would
is
think
the
he would stay in Europe, but okay.
Of the United States.
That's an interesting choice, I think. I have thoughts about that, but we'll leave that for a different podcast.
Also, Shorts King Thomas Bach is also playing.
Okay. Dallas is going to be great, and it's going to be in my time zone. I will be watching Dallas for sure. What to expect from Ground Pass? So, I mean, guys, the Australian Open has been long.
Yeah, we're kind of a bit tired, guys. I mean, I say we. Nick is tired because he's had to, juggle tennis with life. Anastasia has been non-stop producing content. I'm a little bit worried about her, to be honest.
It has been a journey, but I've had fun doing it. It's been a bit of a challenge, obviously, but it's been really great interacting with people. Like, we have so many new followers on Instagram. Blue Sky has been going great. On Threads, I love talking to all of our followers on Threads. So it's been great, but it's been daily, and we're going to step back away from daily. It's not going to be daily anymore. It was something great to do during a Grand Slam, and I really enjoyed it, but we're going to go back a little bit to regular scheduled programming. We are mostly bi-weekly, but we will have either a special episode or a mini pod for you every other week, but you will always get Nick and I bi-weekly. Next week, we do have a special episode. It's going to be the beginning of a new series that we're really, really excited for. It's called Meet the Professionals, and that's where I'm going to leave it at. If you follow us on social media, on all of our channels, all the links to all of our social media are in the description of this episode. So just go there. You can click and go right to it. We also have a link tree that will just list everything for you. So it makes it easier. It's like one click wonder. So stay tuned to our social media, where we will make an announcement of the first episode of this series, which will be on our podcast feed and also our YouTube channel. So that's kind of what you can expect from us outside of the Grand Slams. We're still bi-weekly, and then you'll have either mini pod or now one of these special episodes in between that we've kind of been filtering through over the last couple of months. So excited for that stuff. And also just excited for our YouTube channel. I think I've kind of been thinking about it, like how do we make it different from what we've been doing and have it just be video versions of the podcast. And I'm excited to see what cool things we can do. Nick and I have kind of been brainstorming and thinking of cool things. If you watch last year, at the end of last year, we released a mini kind of a tournament documentary, which was all about challengers, which was really fun to make. It was super short, really quick. I also released some of the episodes, some of the interviews in full form that I did for those. So that's been really cool. So I think that direction, kind of introducing the audience to getting into the nitty gritty of tournaments, learning about different aspects of tennis. Yeah, stay tuned. This is going to be an interesting year of growth and seeing what Ground Pass can sort of help bring new tennis fans who are interested in getting to know the sport better. Cool. It's a fortnight, Nick, so guess what? It's time. It is time. It is time for the player of the fortnight. Maybe I should record something fun that we We can always do when we announce it, but
just get the guy who announces the US Open to do it.
don't even tempt me, Nick. I might find that man and have him do it. Player of the Fortnight, Nick. You have some explaining to do.
I'm going first, am I?
Yes.
Oh my word. Okay, fine. I was hoping to end the podcast on this, but okay.
Okay, no. I love that. I can go first. I can totally go first because you do have some explaining to do. So I will go first. Player of the Fortnight for me, Anastasia, is Lerner Tien. I mean, if you've even listened to this whole podcast, you probably had an inkling of who I was going to pick. But Lerner Tien, American, 19-year-old, coming to his first Australian Open, and he gets to the fourth round. He had an epic match against Daniil Medvedev, who he defeated in 5 sets. And you might know him from last year. If we talked about him, we definitely did, talking about him, about his streak that he had on the Challenger and ITF circuit. He went on like a 28 match winning streak that was, everyone was talking about it just before the US Open last year. So he's definitely been someone who has been up and coming, and I think he definitely made, announced himself to the bigger tennis world at this Australian Open. He is now 80 in the live rankings and in the top 100, which is a big jump that he did during this tournament. And it sets him up well for the rest of the year. I think if you're going to go to tournaments in the US this spring, expect to see him there. And I'm really excited to see how his 2025 season goes because he's really an exciting prospect. I like the way he plays. And yeah, it's nice to get another young American on the tour in the top 100.
Yeah. Lerner Tien was the obvious choice, given he kind of caught everyone's attention with the way he beat Medvedev. Like, you could have gone with Fonseca. You could have gone with Nicholson, who did get around further than Tien. Let's face it, like, it wouldn't be the same for Lerner Tien. I mean, yeah. How do you feel about not being able to pick him for the rest of the year now?
I got him out of the way early, saving Fonseca for later.
Wait, saving Fonseca for when he somehow inexplicably wins the US Open. No. Yeah, okay, right. I've got to explain to you. So you're probably thinking, okay, the obvious choice for Ground Pass player for Fortnight on the WTA side from Nick would be Evelise, because lucky loser makes the fourth round. She only found out like 10 minutes before her first round match that it was actually in the draw. Makes the fourth round, and there's a great video of her out there where she gets told how much money she's won by reaching the fourth round, and she looks like she could. That was a face of a woman who, like, if Kaching had a face, that was it.
That would be it.
That would be the face. That was a woman who realised she could now eat for the rest of the year.
Yes.
So, but I'm actually going for Madison Keys. You're thinking, but Nick, Madison Keys is a top 20 player who has been to a Grand Slam final before. Well, first of all, because of her ranking and because she hadn't won a Grand Slam until now, you could have gone to see her at Grand Pass this Australian Open. I don't think she was put on any main courts. You could have gone watch the future champion of the Australian Open on a Grand Pass due to the fact she was the 19th seed. Like that, very rarely would she have got put on a big court. And up until the Collins match, she played in round 3. First couple of rounds, yeah, you could have gone to see her. But I think you could also go for her because she is the best player of the last, legitimately the best player of the last month, probably. The main reason why is because I was looking at going, who do I go for? And one of the things we go for when we think about player of the Fortnight is tell us the stories that everyone should know, right? And we found out a lot about Madison Keys after she won the final. For those who don't know, maybe a bit newer, like Madison Keys has been on the scene for 10 years. It's been 10 years since she got to the Australian Open semi-final as a teenager, unseeded. If we were doing Grand Pass 10 years ago, she would have been our player of the Fortnight at that tournament. And she went toe-to-toe with Serena Williams in that semi-final for at least a set. Like, it went to a tie-break, and there were some highlights doing the rounds on social media of like how she was taking it to Serena. And Madison Keys had been basically said that from the age of 11 or 12, she was told she was destined to win a Grand Slam. And she said that now one of the things that held her back, particularly when she got to her first Grand Slam final in 2017 against Sloane Stephens, was that weight of expectation. It's interesting that only recently that she's come to terms with the fact that she still had a great career, even if she never won a slam. That weight of expectation didn't matter anymore. And I think that's an uplifting moment, the fact that that weight was off her shoulders, allowing her to play freely, to be mentally resilient, to get the job done against the number 2 and number 1 seeds, was incredible. And I think it gives us a bit of an insight into what do these players go through when they are such promising talent, when they're told this day in and day out. What are the next gen that we've been excited about on the men's side? How are they going to handle the expectation of, hey, look, Fonseca, Menchik, Tien, Mickelson, Shang, great jobs, guys. You are going to be fighting for Grand Slams in the future. There's only 4 Grand Slams a year, guys, and they can't win them all. And Sinner and Alcaraz aren't going anywhere. These guys, I think, and we're seeing it with like Caroline Garcia on the WTA side is having to go on a similar journey with kind of accepting the career that she's had, because she was picked by Andy Murray to be a future world number 1, and that never materialized. She's won the WTA finals, which is a great achievement, and not respected enough by a lot of tennis fans, to be honest. So I think Madison Keys has managed to have her cake and eat it by accepting that she had a great career and then achieving what she was destined to in the end. And I think when you see that human side of the story about what it is to be, what it's like being in the spotlight all the time, that's the kind of stories that really ultimately matter when we get an underdog win like this. That is why Madison Keys is my player for Fortnight.
I have nothing to say.
I sufficiently justified it then.
Totally justified in that being the end of this episode. Couldn't have said it better, Nick. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening. Stay tuned to what's coming next week, and we will see you live and direct in a couple of weeks. Bye, guys.